Hey, Nana Visitor here. You know me as Kira Nerys on DS9, and you're listening to Trek Untold.
Hello and welcome to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz, and welcome to Trek Untold episode 100. I cannot believe we are here. I think I said that again at episode 50 when I talked about how I couldn't believe we were at episode 50, but yeah, I can't believe I actually made it to episode 100, and you did too. So, first thing before I go into anything else in this show, I have to give you a big thanks. It's thanks to listeners and audience members like you who keep coming back each week to check out what we're doing, meet our new guests, hear their stories, and support this podcast. It's not a lie when I say I can't do this without you and your support. And that's why I want to show my gratitude before I even do anything else on this big episode 100 to you. And since this is episode 100, I had to go big as possible, to make sure this was a truly memorable experience for all of you out there, including myself. And that's why today I am very elated to present to you this discussion I had with none other than Kira Nerys herself, Nana Visitor. And I can tell you right now, I got goosebumps as I even just mentioned her name and think back to the fact that I got to spend an hour with Nana Visitor, which is absolutely surreal to me. One of the coolest things for me about this podcast is the fact that I have the opportunity to spend some time with folks who I've seen on TV or who I've seen their career in other various ways depending on what they do, and have a chance to really spend some quality time with them, and in turn, share that quality time with you as well. And Nana was easily one of my favorite interviews of all time, and she is easily one of my favorite female characters in the Star Trek universe. Nana, of course, was Kira Nerys for all 7 seasons of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and she had quite a journey on that set, as we're going to hear about today. And you know how Trek Untold always has kind of a habit of getting a little bit heavy when it's not even expected to get heavy? Well, that's very much, oddly enough, how this interview with Nana turned out too. Playing the character of Kira Nerys was a very difficult ordeal at times for Nana, because this character has so much trauma built into her story. It was impossible for Nana really to not feel that weight in any way whatsoever. So yeah, as it turns out today, we talk a lot about the trauma of playing Kira Nerys, and how Nana as a human being and a person survived this character through those 7 seasons. But don't you worry, it's not going to be all super duper heavy stuff, although to be fair, it's DS9, so, well, that means it's going to be pretty heavy no matter what. But hey, we're not to talk about trauma this week because we're also talking about some other really key episodes that have Kira in them, some fun action figure stories, and some other interesting parts about Nana's career that I also wanted to chat about. And in particular, one of the reasons I did reach out to Nana was because of her Instagram page, and that page is where she gives a lot of life stories and life lessons that she shares with all of us out there, which I believe are very, very important and things that Trekkies should hear every single day. They're not necessarily easy things to hear, but they're always very necessary to live, to feel better about yourselves, and just to become a better human being. So I hope you enjoy this hour with Nana Visitor because, man, this was a real fun one. We went to some avenues I did not expect to go down, but I'm happy that we did, and I hope you enjoy them too. And hey, make sure to stick around after the interview because we're going to talk about what's happening next for Trek Untold, so you don't want to miss that. But before we start talking to this week's guest, I want to remind you guys to make sure you are following Trek Untold on all forms of social media. You can check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at Trek Untold, and that's one word, Trek Untold, no spaces in between. That's the best way to stay up to date on who our guests are for the week, learn all about them before the show begins, and check out all the random memes I post because yeah, I do a lot of that too. If you're in a position to financially support the show, please consider becoming a Patreon member. Head over to patreon.com/trekuntold to see all the different ways you can help financially at different contribution levels. Some of the perks include early access to the episodes, having the chance to ask guests questions, and hopefully some more stuff that I'm going to figure out pretty soon. It is easily the best way to directly connect with me, as well as to meet other fans of this show. If you're looking to buy some Trek Untold merchandise, don't worry, that's going to be coming very soon. If you prefer to check out the video version of this podcast, head over to youtube.com/nerdnewstoday, where every Sunday I post these episodes in video format, which includes a lot of images and video from the guests that we're talking to. But the most important thing you can do to help support this show is please leave us ratings and reviews if you're checking us out on iTunes, on Spotify, or other audio platforms that allow you to leave reviews and ratings, or by subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as giving our Trek Untold videos thumbs up, likes, and comments. All these interactions help push our podcast to the very top of these different platforms to make sure more Star Trek fans can find us. It costs you nothing to do other than a few moments of your time, so please, if you haven't done that already, consider doing so. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and beam up this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. And welcome back to Trek Untold. And right now, I'm going to try to contain myself from totally geeking out. But joining us today on the other side of the screen, we have, you know her as Kira Nerys from all 7 seasons of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. To me, this is just someone that I'm just already freaking out over. Oh my god. We got Nana visitor, folks. Nana, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Matthew? I'm happy to be here.
I am very, very excited, as you can tell.
I love that.
I'm going to do my best to hold it together. I make no promises. So yeah, we got a lot to talk about here. Plenty of Trek things as well as a few non-Trek things. But I'd like to actually start this with a question I like to ask all my guests, and I'm very interested in hearing your answer on this. Nana, what's your earliest memory of Star Trek?
My earliest memory of Star Trek, I was a chorus girl on Broadway, and every night before I went to the theater, which of course was kind of early, I watched the original Star Trek on Channel 11. And I don't remember the apartment, but I remember the tiny TV. And I remember I sat on the floor in front of it and ate my dinner and then went and did my show.
That's right, you are a New Yorker, so it's really funny hearing you say you watch Channel 11 because I'm like, yeah, that's Pix. That's the same channel I watched it on too.
Yeah.
So we should also add right now that you're working on a really cool Star Trek project. I believe it's with Hero Collector, right? It's called A Woman's Trek. And for those who have had their head stuck in Odo's bucket for the past year or so, would you mind just telling us a little bit about what that project is and what you're doing?
What I'm doing is looking at the 55 plus years of Star Trek and the women who were a part of it, how they affected the culture, how they affected women who watched the show. At the same time, looking at how the culture, those women on the shows, the culture that they were caught in, how they lived through it, how that went for them. And I'm interviewing people in front of the camera, behind the camera, the people who watch the show. I am interviewing Samantha Cristoforetti in a couple of days, and I am so excited. She's coming over to my house, and I'm like, talk about geeking out. I just cannot believe it. The European Space Station astronaut. And, I've talked to so many astrophysicists at this point. It's like, and I feel somehow I may be a scientist too. I don't know. It's just like it's my people now.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear, and I can tell you're having a lot of fun doing this project. So I was wondering though, is this going to be a book? Is it a documentary? What exactly is the project? I thought it was a book, so you can correct me if I'm wrong here.
We're doing both
Oh,
at
it's both.
once. We're filming all the interviews, and it's really interesting. I mean, there are, how many stars are there in the sky? That's how many kinds of feminism there are. Everyone has their own version and what they think are the salient points. And I'm really learning as I go. There are many ways to look at A Woman's Trek, the title, but one of them is that it's my journey in all of this and understanding the cultural um, kind of currents that worked against women in the business and in life, and the what's gotten better, what hasn't, what's unbelievably improved, what's still there.
Yeah, I mean, it even seems like even during the time when you were doing D Space Nine, in a lot of cases when it came to like women's rights or women being in film and TV, it was always like one step forward, maybe two steps back. I mean, is that kind of the consensus that you've heard?
Yes, but what I think is the biggest change, like when I talk to the women on Discovery, is an awareness of it. I mean, that's half the battle. You can be so caught in the culture and what the culture demands, you don't even know that you're living a life that is determined by what is allowed and what isn't allowed. It becomes normal that you don't go out after dark because it's too dangerous for a woman alone. These things that constrict our lives, just looking at it, just being aware makes a huge difference. And also talking about how we're doing makes a difference.
Well, I cannot wait to see this book. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait to see the documentary and how it all comes together. I'm hoping right now that this episode goes so well that you'll want to come back and talk about that when it does come out. But we'll deal with that, I guess, whenever that
It
happens.
sounds good. Sounds good.
I'm gonna take that as a yes already. Awesome. So yeah, I got a few things to ask you, Nana, before we get into all the deep dive into Star Trek here. And this might surprise you to know, but on this show, we talk a lot about Murder She Wrote because it's a thing I really am into, and I love talking to all the guests I have on the show because so many of them, if they were in '90s Trek, they were probably in Murder She Wrote. And when I did my research on you, I watched the episode, and you're in an episode, but you didn't get to actually act with Angela, so I was a little disappointed. But then I did my research, and you were in a touring production of Gypsy with Angela Lansbury. Oh my God, you were touring with the Queen herself. So please tell me what
I
it was like to work with Angela.
Well, I was 18 years old and pretty new, obviously, to the business, and she taught me. She taught me not only by watching her on stage, but literally said, "This is how you do this." Generous, beyond belief to teach a young actor. And it certainly made me feel like, oh, I can't wait for my time. I can't wait to, you know, pay that back to other women. She was amazing. Absolutely amazing. She is amazing, but she was amazing to work with.
I mean, that's pretty much the thing I hear all the time whenever we talk about her, and it's always impressive. Each time I talk to someone and get a new story about her, it's always more impressive. It's like, the kindness that she showed, the generosity that she showed. It didn't matter if you were a legend or if you were a new person. She basically treated you the exact same way. That's kind of
That
amazing, isn't it?
it is amazing. It's so generous and so huge. And I got the pleasure to see her in Sweeney Todd, where she was just astounding. She ripped up the stage. She was so good in that. I'd say she was great in Gypsy. She was better in Sweeney Todd.
I mean, Sweeney Todd is her role. I mean, you can't ever top her.
I That's how I feel about it.
So I'd love to know. I mean, this is a pretty young age that you're working with her. So in terms of like maybe let's say life lessons or even acting lessons, but I'm curious to know what's something that she taught you that you still remember to this day and that you use and feel to this day.
The discipline, the discipline of uh counting your steps because you have a performance that night, the discipline of all the focus on what you do during those 1.5 to 2 hours, and how you are like an athlete. And she treated herself like an athlete, and I certainly learned that from her.
Yeah, she really flexed her muscles. That's a good way to put it.
Hmm.
Now, since you are Mama Nana on Instagram, I wanted to do something today nice for my mama. So you appeared in 2 episodes of MacGyver, which is one of her favorite shows. She's a huge Richard Dean Anderson fan. I just rewatched your episodes, so I would love to hear if you have any stories about working with Richard Dean.
Uh, I'll tell you, it's kind of a story. He's lovely. He's warm, and he's just a lovely man. But I can't. The first one I did was early in the run of that show, and I remember there was a camaraderie between the actors and the crew, and they were singing songs and enjoying what they were doing as they went off in a truck. It was some kind of war song. I can't remember what it was, but there was an ebullient air. And
Great
then
word.
and then and then this was TV, episodic TV, a grind. And when I came back the second time, actors didn't come out of their trailer when action was called. Where are they? They're in their trailer. The grips were, had unhappy faces and were tired and napping. Look, I I I knew it then, and I learned it big time during Star Trek. Those years, doing 26 episodes, it was insane. Everyone is sleep deprived.
It kind of reminds me of a story that Patricia Tallman told us here on the show, and that was like basically her mental health was in such bad shape because of how hard she was working. Even if it was not on Star Trek, she was still hustling everywhere else, taking so many jobs, and
Yeah,
mental health wasn't really a thing that was considered in those times. So, I guess kind of overall question: how did you keep yourself together during those real tough times?
I didn't. I absolutely didn't. I ground myself down to the bone. And I had a 3-month-old child when I started DS9. So right off the bat, and then I had another one during the show. So right off the bat, I was like amazed I got the job because I had an infant. And it was like, I've got to kind of keep that quiet and not bother anyone about that. And then I felt like, well, if anyone is going to suffer, it's going to be me. It's not going to be my child, and it's not going to be the show or my work on the show. So, and you know how well that works. It doesn't. It's not sustainable. You're running hard for a cliff, and you are going to go off it. And it wasn't just the work, interestingly enough, but it was also playing a traumatic character. And I took a deep dive in recent years, really looking at what trauma playing someone uh, does to a person, and what MRIs show, what happens to the brain when you're playing a character. And actors really need more protocols and more awareness of how to get in and out. That's what they need the most.
Now, when you say in and out, do you mean in and out of the character to kind of distance yourself from it, or do you mean in and out of the industry?
I don't mean, no, I mean the character, and I don't mean distance yourself from the character. I mean make it clear when you are this person and when you are yourself. Because think of it, when you start to think a different thought, your brains, the synapses start forming. In many ways, Kira really, I formed synapses that serve me to this day. There are character traits of hers that I now have, and that's great, but also her trauma. So, your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a thought from a character and a thought that's your own when you're acting, or at least that's been my experience. You will tear, your heart rate goes up, all those things. That's trauma to the body. That's a wear and tear if it goes on day after day for hours at a day.
And it's kind of funny, you and I didn't really discuss what we're going to talk about doing this episode, but my question list is actually kind of about more of the traumatic episodes for Kira, because I'm really curious to hear about that, because, just looking forward a little bit, you've done such an amazing job with some of those very heavy episodes, and I'm very curious to get your take on how you handled those. But before we even get into that, I'm wondering, how did your interpretation of Kira, let's say on season one, what was that, and then how did it change by the time you got to season seven, or even today here in 2022?
Well, I didn't have a term for it, but I would say that I understood that this was a person who had post-traumatic stress and would be reactive and would hide a lot of other emotions underneath anger, and and certainly hide her fear. So that was the start. That's where I started. And I would say the 7 years were a slow healing process. And her, DS9, people always say, well, you didn't go anywhere. Yes, we did. We made the amazing leap between people, between minds and hearts. It was a show about relationships. So her building her community and learning to trust again was her big journey.
I like how I started asking about MacGyver. Now we're getting into trauma, so that's like such a weird way to get around this. But we're definitely going to come back to that point, because that's really interesting to hear, though. But I'd like to get a little bit more obscure before we go back to the Trek stuff for a second, because I was digging, and I like to dig on Trek Untold. That's why we call it Trek Untold.
I've got some obscure stuff. I think I've played bugs in indie films 3 times.
I've got some questions for you about some other things. I mean, I'm going to probably save it for another day,
All
but
right,
oh man, I mean, you
go,
were.
Matthew. Go
I mean,
on.
all right, we're gonna dig deep here. So I was looking on the old IMDb, and I found a series that kind of led me down a rabbit hole. I never knew this existed. You were in this show, the TV series based on the film Working Girl, and I don't know if you know, Nana. By the way, the entire series is actually on YouTube. You can watch it there if you haven't seen it.
No, I didn't know it was on.
It's
That's
actually
so
there because I went
weird.
looking it up, or I wanted to see what the show was. I go look at it on Google, and all of a sudden, there's Sandra Bullock, because Sandra Bullock starred in a sitcom, and I never knew this. that's
Yep.
that's amazing. So I would love to hear. I mean, again, I wish you mentioned you were Bryn Newhouse. That was your character, and you were a lovely blonde.
Yes.
and
Lovely blonde with shoulders that were, you couldn't go through a doorway
gotta
with.
turn yourself to get through a door. Yeah, those are impressive shoulder pads.
That's right.
So I
That's
would love to
right.
hear what it was like working with a very young Sandra Bullock on this show.
When I see her in interviews now, I go, well, she hasn't changed at all. She was down to earth. She treated everyone with dignity and respect. She talked to every crew member and would probably go out to dinner with them before anybody else. And sometimes there's this weird hierarchical thing that happens on sets. I think less and less, but certainly back then it was true. And she wasn't, or young women who are number one on the call sheet, who will take care of themselves by putting music on and not coming out and not talking to me. She was on the set talking to everybody. She was open and lovely and was doing her brand of acting already. She was doing that very natural thing, which wasn't sitcom, and no one knew what to do with her. It was like, this doesn't mesh. We were all doing that tonal thing of, sitcom. And she wasn't. She was just truly there. It was really lovely.
Yeah, you put that into wonderful words there, because I was thinking the same thing as I was watching some of the episodes. It was like, it felt like she was doing her own thing. It still fit into the world that you guys are doing, a working girl, but she was just kind of being Sandra Bullock as we know her today. It's kind of amazing that she knew herself so young.
Yeah, amazing. Really amazing.
Yeah, and we're gonna save. I got another obscure one for you. I'm gonna save it for hopefully next time I chat with you. I've got one that's a real deep dive, but
I've got one for you that I know you cannot find anywhere.
oh,
I
okay.
did a series when I was 18 again, or yeah, close to 18, called Ivan the Terrible. And it was all in the family, basically, but set in Russia. Yeah, you'll never find that one.
That sounds like a challenge. I mean, there's another one I'll just throw it out to you right now. I was gonna consider asking you about. That's O'Hara, because that is a real obscure one, and I'm kind of obsessed with that show.
Well, and Denise Crosby was on the same episode,
She was, yeah.
trying to kill me.
Yeah, that's fun times being chased by Tasha Yar, yeah.
Yeah, not bad at all. I remember, and again, another woman who is exactly the same. I just interviewed her for the book, and she is as lovely and down to earth and open and sweet and self-reflective as she was that night. I think we were on PCH somewhere, and it was at dinner that I got to meet her finally, and it was like, I like this woman, and I still
So,
do.
so you probably didn't really have much of a chance to, I guess, talk to her back then, right? It was probably just work, work, work. So it was. I'm just kind of, going back to your book now and your documentary. Is this kind of the first time you've really had a chance to hang out with a lot of the women of Trek?
Well, no, because conventions are a wonderful thing. And Denise and I are going out on the cruise at the end of this month, which we have done before. And we are dangerous together. We have way too much fun. So no, some of the women from the other shows, it is my first opportunity. Some of the guest stars, like France Nguyen, that I interviewed from the original show. Of course, I didn't know anything about them. And it was amazing to learn these women had huge careers. It wasn't like, oh, that's their claim to fame. No, as they had enormous careers. But it's the first time we've talked about, it's the first time I get a chance to talk to Denise about what it felt like to be a woman in the business. How was it on to be in Playboy? What did that mean to you? To do those kinds of deep dives with women that I know, that's even better.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, Denise is like someone that's on the top of my list for people I want to talk to on this podcast. Because again, her career is so much more than just Star Trek, and there's so much to it. And I'm
Oh
very
yeah,
excited to see what you pull out of her.
yeah. It's yeah, she's very there are certain people who live by a code that culture has told them you're not allowed to do that. And it's like, no, you're not allowed to say on a series that you want to go, that this isn't good enough. You're not allowed to do that. So brave.
Trek Untold will return momentarily. Trek Untold is brought to you by Triple Fiction Productions. If you're a Star Trek cosplayer looking for props, or toy collector looking to spice up your shelves, Triple Fiction Productions has you covered. Triple Fiction Productions produces affordable and unique 3D printed Trek-inspired products from the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and the movies. You can expect the same amount of care and attention to detail in any of the items in their catalog, whether it's a prop replica for use in a fan film, or a part of a cosplay, or accessories and playsets for figures from Playmates, Migos, or Diamond Select. Own your very own tricorder or phaser rifle with working lights, the bridge of the Enterprise E for your Playmates figures, or any other item from countless species and ships from the Star Trek universe. All products are 3D printed in the USA and are constantly evolving and improving based on fan feedback. To learn more about their products, visit them at triple-fictionproductions.net or on Facebook at facebook.com/triplefictionproductions. Triple Fiction Productions, taking Star Trek where no 3D printer has gone before.
Hi, I'm Armin Shimmerman.
And I'm Kitty Swink. 17 years ago, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I didn't know it at the time, but I had a 4% chance of surviving 5 years.
As her husband, I was very scared.
But he never let me see that. You are a rock.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pancreatic cancer is the third leading cause of cancer-related deaths in the United States, with a 5-year survival rate of just 10%.
We want it to be much higher.
Much higher. It's 6% better when I was diagnosed, but not high enough. More than 60,000 Americans are estimated to be diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2021, and more than 48,000 will die from the disease. Because symptoms are often vague, it can be hard to detect.
Like the rest of the world, the Star Trek universe has been struck repeatedly by pancreatic cancer. Not only those of us that work on the show, but our fans around the world as well. It is why we came together with so many others to work with the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, the leading patient advocates committed to fighting the world's toughest cancer.
PanCan is working hard to create better outcomes for this devastating disease through its groundbreaking research in early detection and better treatment options.
PanCan drives progress by funding life-saving research, providing personalized patient services, and creating a community of supporters and volunteers who will stop at nothing to create a world in which all pancreatic cancer patients will thrive.
You can help support their important mission by donating at pancan.org today. We donated. Won't you do so too?
Please, make it so.
We now return to Trek Untold.
All right, well, then let's go ahead, I guess, and let's just go on deep into some DS9 stuff here. There is so much I want to know, and, we only have an hour, I know, so I've got to condense all this excitement down into one little thing here, but I really want to start at the very top, and we kind of talked about your interpretation of Kira mentally. I want to go into some of the physicality of Kira, because I think one of her most defining characteristics physically is that walk, the Kira strut, and I would love to know where that came from.
I got told to tone it down. I, I got told to, you're walking like John Wayne on the promenade.
It worked.
But to me, that was all about her armor, her mental armor, and her readiness to get into it with whoever might come at her.
So did you approach that walk as kind of maybe something that she used externally as not really her? It's basically a fake thing that she puts on for everybody else, or did you feel like it actually was her?
Well, when you're a dancer on Broadway, you walk a certain way because you think about dancing or you're dancing all day long. So it's just in your bones. It's the way your muscles are trained. So for Kira, she was a fighter, and she's trained that way. That's the way she's thinking. She's thinking if someone's coming down the promenade, if he attacks me right now, I attack. right? Now is the time to hit him in the eyes. You know what I mean? She's constantly, no matter what she's thinking about, she's got that, which all we as humans have. We're constantly looking and looking for dangers. That is heightened in her so that she is ready for danger from whatever direction it comes from, even if she's having a talk with her friend.
Yeah, it's been fun kind of rewatching some of the season one stuff in preparation for our chat today because it's very much apparent that it's like, at that point, especially, she's got people who she's willing to open up a little bit to, but she's still very much in her own little world and trying to protect herself. And you can see it in the way you move, the way that the body has been kind of, the little, it's basically the little things. He did such a great job of that. So it's really
Thank
cool to
you.
hear that. Yeah. And so, kind of bring it back to some more nerdy stuff here too. I'm, as you can imagine, a Star Trek nerd. So I collect all sorts of Trek stuff, and especially the action figures. And I love hearing about what folks think about their action figures, because you got one from DS9, I think you got the doll also. You've had a few others. But what did you think of your very first action figure? And most importantly, do you think it looks like you?
No, I don't think it looks like me. I think they got the shoulders right. The back of my shoulders is like, oh yeah, that's me. But it's such a strange, surreal thing to look at a figure, an effigy that's supposed to be a character you're playing. It's something where my brain would just refuse to accept the reality. But this happened. My I think my son was just learning mama when my doll came out, and I had a very large dog at the time as well. And I got it in the mail. I got the little doll, and I don't know if he I don't know if he recognized it and so it does look like me, or if he happened to be saying mama, but I took it out and Buster said, Mama. So I thought, okay, this is probably going to be really weird, but I'm going to hand it to him. And he went, Mama. And then gave it to our dog, who just, Lulu had huge, and just destroyed it. My first doll was destroyed, my first effigy. But that kind of was like, yeah, that's kind of perfect. It's a good way to look at it.
I'm like trying to mentally break this down here. I'm like, is there something Freudian about that? Like giving this toy of your mom to a dog to chew on? That's I don't know how to.
I think it was perfect. It was like, little Buddha Buster going, this is not the thing to concentrate on. It's a piece of plastic that will be chewed up. And that's true.
So I know that one kind of came out a little bit out of left field. Probably is not how we were flowing initially with the Kira trauma stories, but I kind of wanted to lighten things up for a little bit here. Because yeah, now we're gonna go hard into some of the real tough decisions that Kira had to make, and I want to start season one because one of my personal favorite episodes is Duet, and that episode has Harris Yulin guest starring in that one as a Cardassian war criminal named Maritza, who of course there was more than meets the eye to him, and there's so much really amazing back and forth between you two. It's such an intense thriller, a lot of powerful moments between you two. And, I feel like Harris does not really get the credit he deserves for the skill that he shows because he's really amazing. And I loved his work in this episode. And, it feels like you're watching kind of like a Broadway show here. There's like two masters of drama going back and forth. It's like poetry. It's real beautiful. I'm raving about this because I really like this episode here. But I would love to hear how you guys put this magic together because, from what I know, most of DS9, they don't do rehearsals. You don't do table reads. Just kind of go into things. So where did you find this rapport with him?
I know that Armin Shimmerman held rehearsals for people at his house, and I think people found that hugely helpful. That was something I never did, probably because I ran home to my son every night. But you're right that Harris deserves incredible respect because not only did he turn in that performance, but think of it. You join a show where the tone, you this is not where is that? It's not Shakespeare, it's not sitcom. Who knows what that tone is? It was very unique. And then you put a heavy makeup on, and then you give massive amounts of dialogue and go, yeah, let's just do this. And here's another actor you've never met. Let's go. So it's really remarkable what he did. It was a bottle show. It was to save money. So, no special effects, or very few, and just the two of us mostly. And it felt like it was going to be a disaster. I remember saying to one of the producers, is this going to cut together? And I think it was a little bit of the off-center emotion of playing all of that, of being so deeply immersed, that made me feel like this is going to be a mess. What is this? And of course, it's my favorite episode as well.
See, I didn't know that going into that, so that's really awesome to hear because it honestly is one of mine. And it kind of reminds me so much of I'm struggling to remember the name right now because it just came to me finally, but it reminds me so much of a David Mamet play in that there's this power struggle going on between you two, and that's where so much of the drama lies in it. And that's what I think I love about it so much. And if I may just comment too on this performance from Harris, I think that he really kept you on your toes and challenged you in a different way than Marc Alaimo did as Dukat. Do you feel the same way about that?
Well, he was playing something really interesting. He was trying to goad me. I don't think Dukat even wanted to really goad me. There was something about, come here, let me, a spider web kind of thing with Dukat. But with Harris, his character was trying to get me to punish him. And it's just heartbreaking. It it broke my heart when he got stabbed. It broke my heart.
Now, there's another episode of DS9 I've had the joy of talking about with a few of the performers who were in it, and it's a very uncomfortable episode, and I think that's why a lot of folks don't talk about it, and it's kind of a surprising one to discuss, and that one is Sanctuary. I think it's from season 2. It guest starred Deborah May, and the episode is about refugees. It's about these Skrean refugees who come to the ship, and they're completely displaced from their homeworld, and they've decided that Bajor is where they want to settle. And so Kira is basically the in-between. She's dealing with Skreans and trying to figure out how to keep them okay, while also trying to decide whether or not she wants these refugees on Bajor. It's a very, very rough episode in a lot of ways, and it's also more so by the fact that the Skreans have this kind of real ugly, pimply makeup going on, and people just don't like even looking at that. So
Yeah,
I'm
now
curious
I
if you
remember that.
Yeah, so this is it's a one that I like a lot. It's also again something that people don't like to talk about because it is so topical and still so relevant today. So I'd love to hear if you have any memories from this episode.
I don't. I didn't even remember the episode until you started to talk about it. It wasn't one that burrowed deep in me. It's interesting, and I haven't for some reason seen that. I've seen a lot of a lot of DS9 recently, but I've missed that one for some reason.
It's an interesting one because people like to bring that one up and they'll say it's like, oh, it's one of the worst episodes, but I think it's one of just the hardest ones to watch, and that's why people avoid it. And just
Interesting.
yeah. And have you found that as a thing where sometimes there's episodes that just came off very uncomfortable that you think you did like an amazing job on, you think it's an amazing episode, but people don't seem to like it?
No, I haven't found that. I found that the ones that I feel like I told the most truth in seem to stay, seem to resonate with people. But yeah, sometimes the subject matter is just something that it's too close. It's just too close. We use that ability for space to put the issues that we have a hard time looking at just a little further into our perspective so that we can deal with them. But sometimes that doesn't work.
Well, to follow up on that thought, was there ever an episode that got a little too personal, a little too close for a non-visitor, that was maybe too close to home?
Mm. The only one that really bothered me was the giving birth to the baby. That I had just given birth and I was still hormonal, and to watch a baby wrangler with the baby with cream cheese and strawberry jam all over it, so cold. Sets are so cold. It was so cold. The mother wasn't allowed to come to it. It was very, very newborn, and that was like, not worth it. Not worth it. Why do we do these things? Real guns on set, not worth it. Let's not do it anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would never have thought that would be like one of the real tough episodes for you personally, but it makes sense. I mean, hearing what you went through, and especially, we're talking earlier about mental health. So, looking at that point in your life and that time on DS9, how were you keeping yourself together? Were you able to keep yourself together on a day-to-day basis?
No, but the discipline that I talked about before and the discipline about of being a dancer, I knew how to do my job. It was something that I snapped into no matter what was going on in my life, no matter how I felt. It was, it was almost something that I had sent to my basal ganglia, like brushing my teeth. It was like, I'm here now. So I was highly functioning mess. And I didn't deal with it until years later. Years later did I deal with a lot of the trauma that happened during the show, and some of it because of the show. It was something I just kind of, because I was so good at that discipline, I had such a hard lock on it that it was almost impossible to open that door and let it all out.
And I just want to also thank you right now for being so willing to talk openly about this kind of thing, because I think it's kind of important for folks to hear this kind of stories, and especially hear it from folks they admire. So, just thank you so much for being willing to chat about these kinds of things.
Thanks, Matthew. I really think that we need to make humans understand that we are all going through all of this together. There's so many people who feel like their anguish is unusual. It's human. I mean, it's all human.
So I'm kind of wondering, if we fast forward a little bit to when DS9 wrapped up and you got to kind of hang up the uniform for a little bit, did you kind of feel like there was a weight off of your shoulders? And I don't just mean the shoulder pads, but did you feel there's kind of like a weight lifted from you and that you didn't have to have this burden of being this character who has so much PTSD and all these issues?
No, no. To a certain extent, it's like Stockholm syndrome. I didn't know how to be without it. Uh, Plus, that was my village. Those people were my community. And I felt like I was put out. I cried for the last 2 weeks of the show. I felt like I was being put out of my village.
That that's tough to follow that one up on because that's such a difficult thing to even discuss here. But um, let's go to some happier moments again. It's going to be a lot of this back and forth as I try and figure this one out too. We're going to such
Yeah.
heavy things. I'm like, I don't even want to have this weight on myself. I can't imagine you carrying it too. But one of my favorite
I'm
performers.
sorry, am I being too heavy?
That's what this show does. But even I'm just.
It's Kira. What are
I
you gonna
know.
do?
I wasn't prepared for all of this weight of Kira because there's so much. But on a slighter note here, because there's gonna be a lot of this back and forth. One of my favorite performers of all time is Rene Auberjonois. I did
And
not
that's going to be lighter?
Well, let's find out about that, I guess. Let's see how this
All
goes.
right.
I mean, I will say I was always very disappointed. I never got a chance to meet him in person at a convention, and it's going to haunt me to this day. But I love hearing stories about him. So, I'd love to wonder what's one of the most fond memories you have of working with Rene on set.
On set? Well, first of all, I always had a slight crush on Rene when I was a young girl watching him in, I don't know why. Was it Benson? I don't know why it was his character that I had a crush on, but I did. And there was something about his fabulous way of acting. I just was like, oh, I loved it. And I couldn't believe he was on the show. And then I couldn't believe I got to act with him. And I respected him so much that it felt like bring your best game. It's Rene. Yeah, I couldn't imagine not knowing. Of course, as much as possible, I always knew my lines, but I couldn't imagine going into a scene with Rene and not having everything right there. He was so quick and so prepared and so capable.
I mean, people are always shocked when they'll ask me, like, who's your favorite Star Trek character? And I always say Odo without hesitation. Because the character, the journey that he went on, too, it's just, there's so much to it. It's basically, my two faves, if I can get super nerdy here with you for a moment. It's going to be Odo and it's going to be Rom, because I think those two just had such an interesting journey.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
So
is interesting.
But in terms of like Odo and Kira, and again, it's such a complicated love story, and that's also something I found so curious too. Like my very first watching of DS9 complete, it wasn't actually me as a kid. It was basically, I'd say, around 2015 maybe,
Hmm.
because when DS9 first came out, I wasn't really watching Trek as much. So
Right.
when I started watching DS9 for the first time completely, I was like wondering, it's like if they, will they, won't they? It's kind of like that kind of a relationship here, and I know
Which I
for
didn't like. I
yeah.
didn't like that. I didn't want that. I was like, no, can't two people of a different sex be friends? Can't we tell this as a friendship and not do that 90s thing? It was so ubiquitous in the
I
90s
had the
of
exact same thoughts, honestly. Like when I was
will they,
watching,
won't they? I hated it. I fought it because of that.
I had the same thoughts watching it because I was like, no, no, they're so good the way they are. And I know like there was that season where Odo basically did kind of let Kira go to Vedic Bareil, and it's it's still a really sad episode, but the fact that those two did find their way back together, it's such a unique love story. So hearing that you were kind of hesitant in the first place to have this will they, won't they kind of thing, what did you think once the writer said, hey, they are?
I thought right away, great, I get more scenes with Rene. And then I thought, I didn't like the handsome hunks that they had cast me with. I thought, the lizard guy on the promenade, why isn't she with someone like that? Why does it have to be this, the typical idea of male? So I realized, no, this is perfect. Odo, it's not about his physicality whatsoever. It's about this soul. So I quickly got on board.
I can't imagine it wouldn't be a bad thing to be kissing Renee. I mean, I've heard stories from other ladies who've had that moment as well, and they said all good things about that. So
No, 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 no. I didn't have that moment. I did not. It was, I mean, so much rubber that, it's that we didn't get anywhere close to each other. And then, the people descend upon you to fix the makeup up and gluing you back together. Okay, do another take for the kiss. And then they rush at you and it's like gluing your nose back on. And so, yeah, no, I didn't get that experience.
well, it's kind of funny too because Renee had that giant amount of prosthetics all over him, and something I hear from a lot of folks who do the heavy prosthetics is their skin is just a mess afterwards. I feel like you were pretty lucky in that you really only had the nose piece, right? You didn't really have a ton of other glue and things on you, did you?
Well, but think about this. I had paint, literal paint on my face so that none of my blood showed through, so that it would, so I'd look like I was all rubber. Because they couldn't get this piece to look like skin, so they got the rest of my face to look like rubber. So that was it was hard on my skin.
Well, I
I
do have.
still have I still have a red mark from pulling my nose off.
I
And
mean,
and it just, I cannot somehow cover it enough. No matter what I do, it's like it's there. I only pulled my nose off after work the first year, and then I went, oh, that was really a bad idea. But it would take 20 minutes with, getting it off. And it was like at 3 in the morning, it's the last thing you want to be doing.
but I gotta say, and I know we're on Zoom right now, but your skin is just like amazing. I mean, I'd love to know what your routine is because I mean, wow.
Thank you so much. Well, now I make up for it. Now I make up for those 7 years, which didn't feel like 7 years. It felt like dog years. So it'd be 49 years. I did Star Trek for 49 years of my life. That's how I feel. But now, sleep. Sleep is a magical thing. Sleep and water.
So, on this show, we talk to a lot of folks who have appeared on episodes of DS9 and other Treks, and a lot of times just one episode, and then they're off to do other things in their career. But, I'm wondering if maybe there's like one guest star who you really loved working with, and you have any stories about them.
Louise Fletcher.
Ah,
I love Louise Fletcher. Oh my God.
talk
First
about
of all,
rivalry.
I was so impressed that Louise Fletcher was doing our show. I couldn't believe it. And she has such dignity. And I mean, it's undeniable. I cannot imagine anyone treating her with anything less than respect. It's just the way she carries herself. And then she has this laugh that's, we would be laughing, and she's got this little girl laugh that's it's giggling uncontrollable. And then we'd go and do this scene where she's being just horrible to me. And it was such a strange juxtaposition, but that's her ability.
But it's a lot of fun to be a bad guy too, isn't it? I mean, you got to basically believe that what you're doing is actually good. And Kai Winn was someone that definitely believed that, and Louise just embodied that so perfectly. And it's not just that she was, an evil character, because she wasn't. She felt like she was doing the correct thing, the right thing all the time. So, yeah,
Sometimes being really certain can be evil.
that's
And she
true.
was very certain she was right.
That's very true. And I just, again, we're talking about some of the adversarial things with like Harris Yulin's character and Louise Fletcher and you. It's like, Ali versus Foreman. It's that much kind of a back and forth.
Yeah, I remember a friend at the time. I it was almost like I got so used to being confrontational with people that if something, I remember something happening in a club with a girlfriend of mine, and I came up against this person, and another friend said, Nanat, you're actually a small person. You're not big, and it's not going to work that you'll be able to flip this person like you do on DS9. It's a good thing to remember.
Although I can tell you, I have spoken to Dennis Madalone on this show, and he's had very, very good things to say about you and how you kick people's butts.
Danger, Dennis Danger. He was really great. You know what? He never condescended. He took the time to teach us and to make us look good. And all the women fighting, I think, on that show looked great. And it it wasn't my experience all the time with stunt people.
Yeah, Dennis is pretty amazing here, and we love talking to our stunt people on this show. And again, he had such great things to say about you. I mean, I think there's one fight in particular where maybe I'm wrong about this. That I heard you did actually accidentally bop somebody. Do you remember a day like that? I think I know the episode
Yeah,
if it helps refresh your memory, because I think it might have been not positive. It might have been the one where John Fleck was guesting as a Cardassian. I don't know if that's the right one though.
it was a woman.
It was a
I
woman.
was
Okay.
I was fighting a woman, and we talked about it. I wish I remembered this better. All I know is that by accident, we were being like, no, we'll make sure we're pulling it, be careful. I don't want to do anything, being so politically correct with each other over this fight. And then by accident, she actually hit me. She was trying to pull a punch, but she hit me. And immediately I could feel rage flare in me, and I hit her. And we ended up laughing, and they had to cut, but it got out of control really fast.
It's like there's an old saying in boxing: your game plan goes out the window as soon as you get hit. So that kind of sounds
Yeah,
like what you
yeah.
experienced. So I would love to talk with you right now about another episode that I think is one of the hardest to watch for me, and that episode is Ties of Blood and Water. This one has Lawrence Pressman. He's returning as Kenny Gamor, who is basically Kira's Cardassian dad. We've seen him back in season 3, and here we are now in season 5, where he returns, where he's basically coming to tell you that he has a terminal illness and that he wants to tell you as much as he can to help with the war effort against the Dominion. And it goes without saying this is a really sad episode here, but if you remember this one, I mean, how did you feel about this material? Because this is something that can get, I imagine, very personal very quickly.
First of all, uh, kudos to Lawrence Pressman. Not only just a lovely man, but a lovely actor, and played that so beautifully. And to the writers, I kudos to the writers to give Kira the opportunity to have loving relationships with Cardassians. I certainly didn't want to be a lover of Dukat's, that I fought, but to have these, um, in Duet, in this episode you're talking about, those were huge opportunities to show her. Duet was really the start of that. It was the first time she goes, wait a minute, I don't need to look at every single Cardassian with bias. And she was incredibly biased before that. And that steady movement happened throughout the show.
Now, this episode was also directed by Avery Brooks, and I'm curious to know, number one, what it's like to be directed by Avery, and did he help you along the way with this particular episode to kind of find your way into it?
He was a wonderful director on this show. He directs like like we're musical instruments. It's a feeling as if he's a conductor. He'll go, oh, I want that in the scene. So whatever it is that he goes, ah, and it's just that's the direction. And which is brilliant because he's giving you a present to open by yourself. He's not spoon feeding anything. He's saying, take this and make it yours. And whatever you think that is, whatever your concept of is, do that. And I found it brilliant and I loved it and I understood it. It was just work from your subconscious. Turn your PFC off just a little bit, turn it down anyway, so you can access everything in this scene.
And if you don't mind me getting a little bit more personal here, because it's not like we haven't done that this entire episode so far, but this episode again, it's a very sad one because you're basically watching someone who, in this case, Kira. This is someone that Kira loves very dearly, and they're now on the way out. Did you channel any memories for yourself to kind of get yourself into the mindset of handling this kind of a story?
Well, I mean, talking about subconscious, you have memories and feelings that you store, but I didn't send myself to the file cabinet to go, wait a minute, who have you lost? Here's the set of emotions. What I did was unlock the subconscious a little bit by turning down the PFC. And then what happens is the truth of the moment. It's this man I'm losing. It's these bits of history we shared together. It's this piece of jewelry that's important, and so that all floods in for Kira. So it's not Nana trying to recreate or manufacture something. It's just happening.
So is that kind of like your approach to acting? Is that you let the characters speak for themselves? You don't really pull from your own personal stories?
But I'm pulling
from the subconscious.
I'm pulling from this brain and this body, and how this brain and this body has responded in all the information it's ever had. That's what I'm working with. But yes, the character needs to speak. I need to shut up for 3 minutes and let the character have its time to live.
I mean, it's no wonder that being Kira was so tough because, man, you're putting a lot of weight on yourself with that. I mean, that's got to be not easy to handle, especially with episodes like this.
Yeah, no, it isn't. No, I didn't, there wasn't a makeup artist coming in and putting tears in, or, my breathing heavily. It was my body was responding to the thoughts that I dropped into my brain. So I was living that truth.
So I could use some mama and na wisdom here, and this does relate to this episode because this is a painful one for my girlfriend. Her dad battled for years against cancer and other illnesses, and as time went on, this episode has become more and more difficult for her to watch. And DS9 has been her comfort show. So just not that long ago, her dad did pass away, and one of the things she told me was like, I can never watch this episode again, because it just reminded her so much of the struggles that she saw her dad go through and the way she felt. Like she saw herself as Kira watching her father go through all this and then ultimately pass. It's such a tough episode because you do become Gamora's caretaker. And that's something the episode doesn't really talk too much about, but it shows a little bit of it. You become a caretaker, you go through this ordeal mentally and physically of dealing with that until he ultimately declines to the end. So, we've already talked about how personal it was for you, whether, what you pulled to make this episode work for you, but I want to get some wisdom here. And more so, for my girlfriend and anybody else who's grieving parental loss. Do you have any insight into how somebody can work through these emotions and get to a better place of healing?
Well, first of all, I think that if you want to put boundaries, do it for a while. Certainly, I can see that as self-care. if there's a piece of music, why put yourself through it? But when we start to push down one emotion, we push everything down. When you learn to, and it's a learning curve with this, it certainly was with me, the uncomfortable feelings of mourning and allowing that. Um, when we accept it and learn to tolerate it, we also learn to allow the joy. And it's our human capacity. So why wouldn't we use it? And when losing a parent, it's human. And maybe, I don't know, maybe people told her she had to mourn in a way that she didn't feel was right for her. I mean, there's no one way to go through grief. Everyone has their own way and goes through it in their own way and should be allowed to. And I think it's when you go, no, I'm supposed to do this, or the culture tells me I'm supposed to feel this now, or I'm supposed to be over it by now. That's when you get into trouble, I think. So my thing is, if she's not ready for that, I get it. There were things on TV that I could not watch. But there is something to say for exposure therapy and crying and allowing. And sometimes a show like that can be a tool for seeing that it's okay to feel.
I feel like one of the things that they don't prepare you for when you do a Star Trek show is the fact that you're going to have fans who love the characters so much that they are, they feel connected to them in such a deep way that they wouldn't feel on a different kind of show. We were talking a little bit earlier about your Instagram page, because that's basically such a source of amazing knowledge and insight and introspection, really, as well, that you're giving to so many people on your page. And, Star Trek fans, I imagine they're coming up to you at conventions, they're bearing their soul to you. It's a little bit like I was just doing here. So, I'd love to know, how does that responsibility feel? I mean, this is something you probably weren't told in day one, like, hey, you're going to have throngs of fans telling you their deepest things. I mean, how do you handle this kind of a weight?
Well, first of all, it happened before Mama and before the Instagram page, that people would, it was like just a human response. They'd say, I'm going through this. Your character, because, the character would be an avatar, went through something similar. And so they want to speak about it. And to me, the fact, Matthew, that you will talk about something you're wondering about, and I don't know, but this is my experience, and I tell you, this to me is where we need to be. We need to be in community and talk and go, I don't know, but here's what I think. And talk about the hard things. And the more we talk about the hard things, what's the line from Light Only Shines in the Dark? Star Trek line, uh, but the other idea is put some light on it. It's a lot less scary, and light is talking about it. We all feel so alone and apart. And I started Instagram because of the pandemic. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand seeing so many young people having huge anxiety, and I had so much work done on anxiety. I had such massive anxiety that I learned stuff about it, and I learned just really practical things to do about anxiety. So why wouldn't I share that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I really love about your Instagram page, because you are just so open to connecting with the fans and giving so much of yourself, which cannot be easy to do. So, I've said it earlier in the show, but I'll say it again. Thank you for being so willing to be open like this. You really are an open book, and that you've been like that for this interview on social media. So it's quite a gift you've given all of us.
Thanks, but I don't think on Instagram it's not fans. It's these humans that there have been a few people that I speak to offline. One man who was going through dying by himself. And to me, I can't think of a better use of my time than just witnessing and going through it and going, I know, I don't know, but here I am with you. Let's just talk about stupid things if you want.
think it's a perfect segue to not end this episode on a sad note. Let's talk about some stupid things.
Okay, stupid things.
Yes,
I know,
let's go
I
for
get
it.
way too heavy. Kira and me. But it's just, at this point, it's just we're kind of fused.
Well, let's get stupid here, if you will. Let's
Okay.
talk about one of, and this will be one of our last things that we'll talk about today in the show, because I could go for hours, and I don't want to keep you here for hours. But one of my personal favorites is "Move Along Home." This is a controversial episode. I love that reaction already. We're off to a good start. I mean, it's a very controversial episode. People call this one of the worst episodes of Star Trek ever. I
Yeah.
really like this episode. But let's just start at the top of this one here. What do you remember from filming this bizarre episode? Did you question this from the beginning, or were you just like, "Hey, it's my job. I'm gonna do this"?
I remember doing that, 1, 2, whatever, buckle my shoe, whatever that thing is, with the rest of the cast and going, thank God I'm Kira, because I can just be hating this as much as I do. And I remember looking at Avery, who was doing it so with all his heart and all his musical abilities, doing the hopscotch stuff.
It really was.
And I hated it. Nana found it humiliating and Kira found it humiliating. And I was just lucky that those two things worked out.
Yeah, that's one of the best parts, is hearing Avery Brooks sing it, and he's like on perfect key and perfect pitch when he does it. It's like no one else even is on his level when he's singing that stupid song.
He's out there doing it.
Amarin, count to 4. Only Avery Brooks can do that and get away with it and make it still sound manly.
I know. It's true. I don't remember much else about that episode.
That makes sense. It's a good one to repress memories from.
Yeah, it's probably one of those things that I need to dig out of my soul, and all kinds of other harpies will come flying out. Who knows? But yeah, that was pretty funny. We didn't have a lot of funny moments on the set. I mean, I don't know who had fun, but it wasn't really us. We were serious, but it was a dark show.
So, from what you remember of this episode, though, I mean, do you agree with the fans who say this is one of the worst episodes ever? Do you think it gets a bad rap?
Probably that's fair. No, I think that's fair.
No
I
hesitation.
think that's fair. Look, you're not going to be great all the time, and I think we had unbelievable episodes. So of course, sometimes we missed. Totally. But look how prescient some of these things are. The subject matter it's unbelievable, and you kind of have to touch on Mr. Brooks's performance in Please
Horizontal
Help Me.
Stars.
Yes.
I knew right away. Yep.
Yes, it's what a beautiful script they wrote, and he did an amazing job starring and directing in it.
All right, so Nana, as we wrap up this interview here, last thing, and this is again, I started the show with a question I love to ask all my guests. I'm going to end it the same way. What's the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
The community. I think of Star Trek now as this big bonfire in the night, and we all gather around it, and the bonfire is definitely the point, but so are we.
Well, I can't top that at all. So on that note, I just want to wrap this one up by, again, saying thank you so much for really just how honest and open you've been. I mean, that's such an amazing thing that you're doing here on the show, doing with your Instagram, just being you, and I love that. And I got to tell you, this is a story I told Armin Shearman when I had him on the show for the first time, and I'm going to tell you also, because I left this part out, but my very first Star Trek convention was 2016, and that was in New York, and I had never really met any Star Trek folks before, so I got online, I think it was like Sunday morning, and I wanted to get you and Armin's autograph. And I got there, and I was so intimidated. Like, once you guys showed up, I was like, I can't do this. I ran off, had a super anxiety attack, and yeah, now I just got an hour with you. So, I just want to tell you that story because it's horribly embarrassing, but also just, again, to thank you for, being willing to chat this long, be so open, and yeah, you're awesome, you're amazing, and, I think that the character of Kira Nerys kind of changed the way I looked at women also, and I wanted to get myself a Kira. So I think I got one nowadays, and I think that's such an important thing. So, again, thank you so much. You have my deepest gratitude. I'm going to keep rambling, but just know I'm very thankful for you being here.
Thank you, Matthew. I've enjoyed it.
And that was our chat with the Nana visitor, which was really, really awesome. I got to tell you guys, I had my question list ready, and really this interview just went completely derailed almost immediately because, I knew certain episodes and certain things I wanted to talk about, but I actually didn't expect for us to go into the trauma thing so quickly. And, luckily I've had the opportunity to talk with so many other folks who have dealt with this, and I've had these discussions on the show before, that I was able to kind of go into this thing a little bit easier. But man, it's really interesting to think about just the difficulties of playing a character like Kira Nerys and looking at it through her eyes, especially now, getting that insight, that very personal insight of the person who played her. It just adds so much more depth to that role and makes me appreciate it even more than I did before. I very much hope that experience was the same for you today, because this is one of those episodes that I'm never going to forget. So that is a wrap for episode 100 of Trek Untold, and the big question now is, well, what's next for this podcast? Well, that is a very big question, but the good news is more Trek Untold is coming, more Trek Untold is on the way. And truth be told, I've actually already recorded like the next 10 episodes for this podcast as we're talking right now. But the bad news is I am going to take a little vacation from the show just to kind of collect myself. And I did this, I think, maybe about 40 episodes ago also, where I took about a 2-month break, more or less, to kind of get things together, work on some other projects, and more or less just kind of take a personal break too. Making this podcast is an incredibly rewarding experience for me, not just because I get to talk to all these amazing people, but also because I get to connect with you. But making this podcast is also not easy, and to be quite honest, I don't quite think I went into super detail about this, but the reason I initially took that first big 2-month break, or whatever it ended up being, was because I actually started a new job. So I wasn't actually taking a vacation really or anything like that. It was more the fact that I had to spend some time getting acclimated to this new job. And now here we are many, many months later. I'm now a year into this job, and yeah, I need to take a little bit more time as well, because there's some things I wanted to do back when I initially took that little break that I didn't quite do yet. So to kind of reiterate some of what those things were, the first thing is the fact that I want to make some changes to, well, Trek Untold itself. One of the things I actually talked about way back in like episode 60 or whatever it was I took that break, I can't remember, but I wanted to start doing a smaller video series called Tales from Trek Untold. And what that's meant to be is me taking pieces of all these many interviews I have to tell one cohesive Star Trek story, or even maybe not Star Trek, but just other stories about other things. And essentially making clips for the show, which is something I should have been doing a long time ago. So I'm going to finally spend some time actually making Tales from Trek Untold, and that's going to come to you also in audio form. It's going to be on YouTube, and it's going to be in audio form. I don't know where it's going to end up first, but that's going to be one of the first things I focus on, is making more clips, which I think will also help this podcast grow. In turn, you're also going to see a lot of those clips start popping up on social media too, because I'm going to make some really short little maybe minute-long clips just to make sure folks know what I'm doing out there. Because in my opinion, one of the things I haven't done enough of is using my social media to a more effective way. So again, I need some time to work on these things. But just beyond Trek Untold, too, there are some other things I've been neglecting for a while, some other projects I want to work on. So I'm going to take this time to not only keep making new episodes of Trek Untold, make these Tales from Trek Untold finally, and also work on maybe some of the other elements of the show, but also maybe just do a few other things for a little while. This podcast is not an easy show to put together, but it is a labor of love. I'm jealous of a lot of other shows out there who have multiple hosts on the show who can share the different duties of doing things. But for this podcast, it's primarily me doing all the work. I'm doing the research, I'm doing the shooting of the interviews, I'm conducting the interviews, I'm doing all the editing afterwards, and then I'm doing all the social media, and pretty much anything else that happens in between this workflow. I should, of course, give a shout out to Rich Butler over on the Rageworks Network, because he is one of the people who is one of my quality control guys. And this podcast is hosted by the Rageworks Podcast Network, so I do recommend if you haven't checked out any other shows that are on that network, go ahead and make sure you do that now. But again, for the most part, this show is primarily done by me, and that takes a lot out of me to do every single week. So part of the plan for this break is not really to just stop cold turkey, but again, to do a lot of other things, and also to keep going on Trek Untold, but with the intent of essentially making another full season. My goal is to make basically, let's say, 25 episodes, to then say, hey, this is season 3 of Trek Untold, we can let her rip out the door, and I don't have to worry about it for a while. And that would be great for my mental health personally, because yeah, this show does take a toll on me. And it's one I volunteer to do each and every week. And I don't feel bad about it, and I don't want you to feel bad about it either, because it is what it is. That's kind of the process how these things get made. But I don't want to get burnt out. I don't ever want this show to become a chore. So yeah, it's going to be time for a little bit of a break from Trek Untold, but we will be back not too off in the distant future. So I hope that you'll stick around. And if you are one of the newer fans of this show, I hope you'll go ahead and check back into the archives, because we got a lot of older episodes, especially way back at the start of the show, because there's some shows way back that I think are criminally under-listened to, and I definitely recommend it. If you haven't heard some of the earlier episodes, do go back and check them out. So with that all said, I do want to make sure I stress this very important thing now, and that's once again to thank you, the fans, thank you, the audience members out there who keep coming back to Trek Untold each and every week to see what's happening and to meet our new guests. I wouldn't do this show if I didn't love doing it, and every week it's such an honor to share these things with you. So thank you for coming back every week to listen on the podcast. Thank you for watching on YouTube. Thank you for supporting me on social media. Especially extra thank you if you're one of my Patreon supporters out there, because I know I don't do enough for you guys yet, and that's going to change also when I come back for episode 101. And just thank you for being a member of the Star Trek community, because this really is one of the best fandoms out there. I don't spend a lot of time on social media in general, really interacting with the fans as much as I should. And when I say that, I don't just mean fans of the show, I mean fans of Star Trek itself. but I found this to be such a welcoming community that it's hard not to want to get invested more into this. So that's going to be one of my goals also when I come back, is spend a lot more time connecting with everybody out there on social media and just becoming more of a part of the Star Trek community. So you all have my eternal interstellar cosmic gratitude for being a part of this Trek Untold journey, and I'm so happy that you keep coming back each and every week to hear what's going on in this show. My rambling words don't really do it justice, but that's really the truth. So please stay tuned for Trek Untold Season 3 coming very soon. I can already tell you, like I said, I've interviewed a bunch of folks already, and I've got some really cool stories that I cannot wait to share with all of you. So please stick around, because there's more Trek Untold coming very, very soon. That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold, and thank you for checking it out. One more time, if you're not following us on social media, please do so by checking us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Trek Untold, and that's all one word, no spaces, on any of those platforms. If you want to check out the video version of this podcast to see our guests, head over to youtube.com/nerdnewstoday, where I post the video version of this show every Sunday after the initial episode airs on Thursdays.
Shout out to our sponsor, Triple Fiction Productions, who create 3D printed toys and prop replicas inspired by Star Trek. Their items come in all shapes and all sizes and are always amazing.
If you're in a position to financially support Trek Untold, please consider heading over to patreon.com/trekuntold to become one of our Patreon supporters. There's a lot of cool perks that you can get by becoming a Patreon supporter, including early access to the episodes, the ability to ask our guests questions, and a lot more cool stuff coming very soon. Please consider leaving a rating and review on iTunes or any other audio platforms that you listen to the show on that allow you to do so. Or if you're one of our YouTube audience members, please make sure you comment on this video and give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz. This has been Trek Untold, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the RageWorks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.